The cost of watching football is getting bigger year on year, and working class fans are gradually being pushed out of the game. This season, Manchester City announced for a 10th consecutive season that season ticket prices would be increasing, meaning that since COVID, some City season tickets have risen by more than 25%, despite a cost of living crisis during this time. To put the cost of football in 2024 to the test, I decided to keep track of all of my expenses during the 2023-24 season. I've decided to split these costs into 3 different categories: ticket costs, travel expenses, and accommodation costs. I've ignored all food and drink because I don't think that truly represents the cost of football, given it will massively vary depending from person to person, as some people will choose to spend loads on drinks, some won't drink at all, some will go to nice restaurants, some will just eat basic food. So I've ignored all of that. I'd also want it to be noted, I'm a 20-year-old, I was 19 for the vast majority of last season, which means that a lot of my ticket costs will be cheaper than an adult who's paying higher prices. And it also means certain things like train travel I might get a bit cheaper due to my 1625 rail card, and so that should also be taken into account when I give my final cost. So last season, Manchester City played 59 games, with 25 of those being played at the Etihad Stadium. 3 of those games were played at Wembley, 22 were dotted around England, as well as 9 games being played outside of the UK, including 2 in Saudi Arabia. Of the 59 games played last season, I attended 54, missing just the 2 Club World Cup games, Luton away, and 2 Premier League home games as a result of family commitments and heart surgery. That means that in total last season I travelled 22,000 miles, visiting 8 different countries along the way. I'm going to go through my costs now, competition by competition, beginning with the Premier League. I'm going to start off with my season ticket cost. So for all 19 home games, I pay £430 a season. This has gone up to £460 for the upcoming season, but my 18 to 21 season ticket for this year was £430, which makes it £22.63 per game, which to be fair isn't too bad value. I sit family stand, level 2, row 1, pretty good seats, not good for atmosphere, but view-wise, you can't really get much better in the stadium. As I said, I did miss 2 home games this year, both of which I was able to sell on the exchange, meaning that in total my cost for all home games in the league this year was £384.74p. Travel-wise, the Premier League home games, I spent a £2.80 return train ticket from the Etihad, and so when you times that by 17 games, I ended up spending £47.60p on travel last season. Swiftly moving on to the away fixtures, my total cost of tickets was £453.50. For Premier League away games, tickets are capped at £30. Obviously, I'm a concession ticket as well, which means that for the majority of games, I do also get a discount. A total ticket cost of £453.50 means that on average for 18 games, I spent £25.19, which again is pretty decent value. I'm going to show on screen now the cost breakdown of each individual game so you can see which clubs charge more and which clubs charge less. Villa, Everton and Forest all charge the most, while Bournemouth and Liverpool are on the opposite end of the spectrum, charging like £15 or £16 respectively, I'm pretty sure. But I would say, to be fair to Forest, I've put them in the top bracket, although I did have to pay adult prices for them because I just turned 20 at the time of that game, meaning I had to pay adult prices, although usually concession does go a bit higher than Forest gave. Travel for the Premier League away games is probably where you'd expect to see the prices gradually start to rise from what it is currently, but to be fair, mine isn't too bad. Obviously, I did 6 trips to London, 2 trips to the South Coast, a trip to Newcastle, a couple of trips to the Midlands, all of that. And my total cost ended up being £473.50, which is an average of £26.31 a game. And when you consider where I'm going from Manchester, I think that's not too bad. I think that figure's going to shock quite a few people, so I'm going to put a breakdown on the screen once again of all the different costs for all the different games individually. But to explain how I've done that, pretty much what I always do is I book my train travel as soon as the fixture dates are announced. So as soon as the TV dates come out, I book my trains. The way I also do it for so cheap is that for London games, I always book to go through Crewe, so Manchester to Crewe, then Crewe to London. It always saves a lot. I usually do London games for about £34. Train travel wise, and then for the games in the South Coast I always get the coach, which is £35. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's even possible to get this any cheaper, and obviously got to note that a lot of people going to these away games wouldn't know if they're getting tickets or not straight away. I always just get the travel straight away and hope I get the tickets in the 1825, and if not, then I'll just try and find them on the day. Anyway, so after adding all of that up, that means that for 35 Premier League games last season, I ended up spending £1,341.34p. Now let's move on to the cost of the domestic cups. So domestically, City competed in 3 competitions last year: the Community Shield, the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. The Charity Shield is obviously just one game at Wembley. The Carabao Cup, we got knocked out in the 3rd round to Newcastle, so we only played 1 game in that. And then the FA Cup, we obviously got all the way to the final. That's 2 trips to Wembley. There was a trip to London for Tottenham away, a trip to Luton for Luton away, and then 2 home games against Newcastle and Huddersfield respectively. So again, with the Community Shield, cost me £25 last season. I got a ticket in the lowest category area. I then also spent the £34 I said already for the train to London, as well as £5 on the tube. That meant the total cost of the Charity Shield last year was £64. For the Carabao Cup game away at Newcastle, I got the coach down and that cost me £23. And then my ticket for that one was just £10, so just £33 spent on the Carabao Cup last season. And then moving on to the FA Cup, the home game against Huddersfield cost me just £10 on my usual seat. For the Newcastle home game, I moved to the south stand in the corner bit. I spent £27.50 on my ticket for that. I obviously then also spent £2.80 on travel for each of these games, which is £5.60 in total. And then for the away games, I got the coach on both occasions to Tottenham and to Luton. That was £30 for each game. And then ticket-wise, my Spurs ticket cost me £35, whereas my Luton ticket cost me just £26. And then moving on to the semi and the final for Wembley, once again, I spent £34 on each train ticket and then £5 on the tube for both games. I also made sure to get the cheapest seats for both games, sitting in the top of the third tier for the Chelsea game and then right at the bottom of the first tier for the United game. My Chelsea ticket was £30, my United ticket was £70. And so overall, that means for all cup competitions, I spent £233.50 on tickets and £205.80 on transport. And then this takes us on to the final segment of the cost, and this is the most expensive bit, the European away days. Last season, Manchester City played in the UEFA Super Cup in Athens, as well as making it to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, which involves 5 home games and 5 away games. I went to every single one of these European games. I've not missed a European game in 2 years. Like I said, these trips involved a trip to Athens for the Super Cup, and in the Champions League, we played Leipzig, went to Bern for Young Boys, Belgrade, Copenhagen, and Madrid. For this part of the video, I'm going to discuss the price of match tickets, travel costs, but for this bit, I'm also going to include the accommodation costs. To begin with, for the Super Cup in Athens, where City beat Sevilla on penalties, I did this as a 5-day trip. I went on the Monday, flying direct into Athens. I was in Athens for 4 days, and I flew back through Santorini. And for this one, I also split my hotel costs between 2. That meant that for this game, I spent £235 on flights. I think this is the most I've ever spent on a City game for flights. I spent £6.30 on other modes of transport, as well as £145 accommodation. And then my ticket for this one was just £27. Next came the group stage of the Champions League, and beginning with Leipzig, I did this one by myself. And so I flew in on the day of the game, and then I flew out the day after the game, but I did have to stay in Luton the night before the game as I had an early morning flight from Luton Airport. I also had to pay quite a lot of extra transport for this as I was flying in and out of Prague, as Leipzig Airport was not very good, so that added on quite a bit as well. So in the end for this one, I ended up spending £60 on flights, £90 on hotels, and £86.50 on other modes of transport, as well as just £13.50 for my ticket. That's very, very good value. Germany's always very, very good value. I did Dortmund and Munich last year as well as Leipzig, and both of them I got very cheap. So yeah, Germany, to be fair to them, are very, very good at cheap tickets. The next game I went to, however, was quite the opposite. It was Young Boys away, and this ticket was £45. Switzerland was not a cheap place either to go. So if we were including food and drink on this, this would have been a high cost. I ended up doing this trip as a 4-day trip. I did 2 days in Geneva, 1 day in Bern, and then I went back through Cologne. I split the cost between 2 as well. Flights for this one cost £77, with accommodation costing me £158. Trains cost Switzerland and Germany also totaled £42. And then ending the Champions League group stages, we had a trip to Belgrade. This was split between 4 of us. Accommodation costs for this were unbelievable. We ended up spending 2 nights in Belgrade, and accommodation cost for that was just £26. However, we did fly through Barcelona, which meant we had to spend 1 night accommodation in Barcelona, so that bumped my price up a little bit, and in the end I spent £54 on accommodation across the entire trip. Additional transport for this game included a £20 taxi to and from the airport in Belgrade, as well as a £30 train back from Luton to Manchester as we flew into Luton Airport the day after the game. Flights for this were also pretty reasonable, as I booked this as soon as the dates came out. Flights for this trip cost me £79. And then to cap Belgrade away off, I ended up spending just £26.50 on the ticket, which again is a pretty reasonable price for what it was. And unlike Young Boys, if we were including food and drink on this destination, it would have been by far the cheapest. Belgrade was so cheap. We were getting about a litre of vodka for £5. It was unbelievable value over there. Next up was the Champions League round of 16, and this took us to Copenhagen, which was again a very, very expensive city, much like Bern. I did this as a 4-night trip divided by 2. My accommodation costs for this were just £130, which was pretty decent considering the accommodation was pretty good as well and pretty central. I also managed to get direct flights to this for just £70 as I went Monday to Friday, which again, pretty decent value. On top of this, I only ended up spending £10 on additional transport. That was metros around the city, which considering I was there for 4 full days, again, this is pretty decent value. My ticket was the only real thing that we're counting here that was pretty expensive. It was £45, the same price as it was for Young Boys away, which again, isn't too bad. But yeah, the only issue with this Copenhagen cost is that it doesn't really take into account how much I really did spend over there, because all the food, all the drinks, they're so expensive. Anyways, moving on to our final European away day of the season, Real Madrid away. And for this one, I flew from Birmingham to Dublin, Dublin to Madrid, on the Monday. The game was on the Tuesday, and then we flew back on the Thursday from Valencia back to Manchester. These flights were booked the second the dates were announced once again, so I ended up spending just £75 on flights in total for all the layovers and everything. And then my additional transport cost £24.50, so that's trains to Birmingham and also trains from Madrid to Valencia. Accommodation for this one was split between 5 people, so we got a pretty good value for 3 nights. Overall, it cost £75, but we did have an issue with the Airbnb on the first night, so we got £50 of that back each. Although we did have to spend accommodation costs elsewhere for that night, which was plus 25. So in the whole, we spent £50 on accommodation for the Madrid trip. Despite the cheap accommodation cost though, Madrid did bump up the price, as we had to pay a full £60 for our match ticket. That's the most expensive ticket of them all. £60 is the cap for an away ticket in the Champions League, and Madrid obviously charged that. All the Spanish clubs are really bad for that. They're the complete opposite of Germany, always charging the highest possible price. I paid the same price at the Bernabeu last year, and also Atletico Madrid away the year before. Anyways, this meant that in the end, I spent £346 on 7 matches abroad. I spent £596 on flights, £236.80 on additional transport, as well as £627 on accommodation. Overall, this means that my spending on European aways last season was £1,895.80. Then with regards to the 5 home games in the competition, the price does vary quite a lot. Before we continue with the ticket prices, I'll add the 5 £2.80 fees for the train ticket to and from the game. And so that means that my travel cost for the home Champions League games was £16.80. I did vary on where I sat for these games, so for 2 of the games I was in the south stand, which made my tickets slightly cheaper, and then for 3 of the games I ended up sitting in my normal seats in the family stand. I do also get a slight discount on all tickets, as I am in the Champions League Cup scheme as well. In the Champions League group stage, I did sit in my normal seat for Young Boys and Leipzig at home. My ticket for this was £22 each. However, due to moving to the south stand for the Belgrade game, my ticket was just £19.50. The price was lifted in my usual seat for Copenhagen at home in the Champions League round of 16. This one cost £32.50. And then for the final Champions League game, I've moved to block 115 in the south stand lower, and this ticket cost me £33. This means that in total I spent £129 on 5 Champions League home games last season. With those added up, that covers the cost of every single game I went to in 2023-24, meaning that I can now show you the final figure that I spent for the season. Overall, last season, I spent £1,417.74 on match tickets, £1,086.20 on travel, and £627 on accommodation across the season, making my total cost for the season £3,130.94 without accounting for food and drink. Just for a bit of context on that figure, a brief Google search suggests that the average wage of someone living in Manchester would be roughly £25,000, meaning that before you even account for food and drink, the average Mancunian would have to spend 12.5% of their wage in order to follow City home and away, and that's before you even account for food and drink. Don't forget as well, this video represents someone who doesn't even pay full price for tickets on top, so this figure is even higher for normal adults. On top of this, I'm a uni student, I've got a lot of time flexibility, so these European away days and a lot of the away games, I can find routes to make it much cheaper because I've just got so much time on my hands. I don't have to worry about work, I don't have to worry about getting the time off work, and that does make a big difference as well. Anyways, that does bring an end to this video. Leave in the comments what you do make of my final total. I wanted to make this video for numerous reasons, one of which was just to show how expensive football is becoming and the dangerous direction that we're heading in. And also I just wanted to make it for a little bit of proof to those rival fans that like to take a dig at City for a few empty seats at Wembley. It costs a lot of money overall. Saving £100 for a Wembley trip when it's a bit of a pointless Charity Shield game, you have to understand it all adds up in the end. And rather than slagging off these City fans that have to make this financial decision, we should all be coming together as fan bases to try and protect fans' ability to go to games in the future, to stop working class fans being priced out the game, rather than trying to point score on attendances. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back again very soon. The season is nearly upon us. Manchester United in the Charity Shield on Saturday, and then Chelsea in the Premier League on Sunday. I'll be back with vlogs for at least one of those games. Anyways, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be back then. Goodbye.